Hey everyone, Tony D, and another screenwriter's tip. This one is how to write military movies, or I should say militaristic movies, because that encompasses a lot of stuff in American cinema. I was thinking of this because I just watched Extraction a few days ago, and it's there's a lot of tropes in military-esque movies that we all know because the American cinema has become so militaristic over the years, especially the big movies. You look at a guy like Michael Bay, there's always like a squadron of guys running around with guns and camo, and you look at the Transformers movies and some of the other movies he's done. It's always got a sort of a military bent to it. If you look at some of the mainstream Hollywood movies, that they don't really have any military people in them at all, and they'll still use some military jargon with regards to getting together at a certain time, or get me some intel, or they'll use the sort of language that has kind of infused the culture in the United States, because we're kind of a militaristic society in a way when you look at it. So when you're gonna write a militaristic movie, let's say a movie about a particular soldier or whatever, the first thing you need to do, obviously, is you need to do some research on what it's like to be in a particular branch of the military. I mean, you've got to know the rules. They have rules for just about everything in the military. It helps to talk to people who were in that branch of the military, of course, and ask them questions that are pertinent to the story. You don't want to do something that completely flies in the face of military protocol. At the same time, there is something I like to call movie logic or movie physics, and that is sometimes when you can kind of gloss over certain rules and regulations because you need to for the movie's sake, and because you don't want to show a boring scene of a soldier going to ask for permission to go do something every single time he needs to do something, right? You give the characters some latitude, and just sort of assume that the various protocols were either sort of done off camera, or you're just skipping them for the sake of the movie to sort of condense everything. Because, being in the military can be very boring. There's a lot of sitting around and waiting. They don't actually do things every single day, every minute of every single day. There's a lot of just sitting around, and resting before you have to go out on patrol or whatever. It also depends greatly on the time period, or where they're stationed, right? I mean, a movie about being stationed in Iraq or Afghanistan is going to be way different than a movie about guys being stationed in like Florida at spring break, right? So you also have to do your research there too. What's it like if you're doing a real military movie regarding, say, Afghanistan? What's it like to be in Afghanistan? All the various elements of the country itself, the geography, the people, what they speak, what they do. That was one of the fascinating aspects of Extraction, because it took place in India and it was about Indian drug lords. I had never seen a movie about Indian drug lords. So it was kind of interesting to see them, because when I saw these Indian characters in Indian clothes, my instinct wasn't, oh, those guys are drug dealers. My first instinct was, who are these guys? See, in America, if you had showed me a drug dealer in America, he might look and act a certain way. And I would immediately go, oh yeah, that guy's a drug dealer. He's some sort of mobster or kingpin. But because we were in this foreign setting, I didn't know what to expect. And then listening to the dialogue and whatnot, I was like, oh, this guy's a drug kingpin. Interesting. So it kind of changes it. And you need to be aware of that kind of, I would say, new sort of trope, right? This, doing crime in India is kind of new ground for at least a movie like this. Now, it's probably not going to be new ground for the huge Indian movie industry. They've got tons and tons of movies on that score, I'm sure. But for American audiences, not so much. I mean, this is really the first I've heard of an American movie that took place in India like this, and really was sort of steeped in the culture, because that was an element of the movie. Now, the military part of that movie, was Hemsworth is a mercenary, for those of you who don't know, who has to save the son of a drug lord. So he uses his other mercenary team. They're very, straightforward, militaristic. Boom, boom, boom. They have an escape plan. They have resources. They have a backup plan. They have everything ready to go. They have the right tools, and they know what to do, and they have the right terminology, seemingly so. Now, I'm not an expert on military history or anything, but they seem to be at least on point enough that it was functional enough. And also, too, I mean, some of it was over the top. As I said in my review, the extraction, the body count was just, and you would have to think that at least some element of the local police force, military, would help them, or at least not shoot at them constantly. So, I'm sure they've kind of, they played with that a little bit. And the assumption is, well, this is like the bad section of these places in India. This isn't all of India. These are the bad sections. And they didn't bother to go into the actual government in India, because for an American audience, that would have went right over their head. Certainly would have went over my head. I know very little about the government in India, other than it's a democracy, and the name Gandhi held a lot of weight in that world for a long time. So when you approach these military movies, it's very important to understand the code of the military you're doing the movie about too. So obviously, American or Australian or Western, they're going to have one code, but depending on the time period, and then if you go back in time, well, things start to change a little bit. That's the other thing too. If you're going to do a time period piece about a particular battle or war, you really got to drill down and do your research there. You may be doing a story that takes place during a particular battle or era. You might do, what was that movie? I think it was called Three Kings, about the guys who were in, they're doing a gold heist during the first war in Iraq, I think, something like that. And something like that is very interesting too, because it allows you to do something using the military stuff, but put a different twist on it, so it's not just the same, guys marching around fighting a battle kind of thing. And I think there's definitely differences between, say, a war movie and a militaristic movie. Like a war movie is going to be, like 1917 or Apocalypse Now, something like that. It's about the war, Well, I guess Apocalypse Now, you could argue, is not. Say, I don't know, Platoon. Platoon would be more about the war. So, war movies are about war. Movies that are militaristic have war in them, right? So I think there's a distinction there. So you might have some high and mighty thing to say about war in a militaristic movie, but that's not the only message. There's something else going on. In a war movie, that's pretty much the message, right? You're going to be commenting on war and man's inhumanity to man and that kind of thing. And I think war movies tend to be kind of dreary. They tend to be sad. Some can be uplifting, but they're hard to really make that as uplifting as, say a comedy or whatnot. I think militaristic movies, though, I think you've got a lot more leeway with them because you can use the military stuff, but you kind of can use it differently. You never know where things are going to go. And in the case of a guy like Hemsworth's character in Extraction, he is not tied to the military rules anymore because he's not technically in the military anymore. He's a mercenary, and he's merely using his military skills to make money. So, I think, a lot of military movies, they can get bogged down in the details, so I think you have to be aware of that. If the details aren't important to driving the story forward, I mean, you need them, but you don't have to make them the focus. So in movies like Zero Dark 30 and what was the other one with the guy who disarmed bombs? I forget the name. It can get boring for a 90-minute, 2-hour movie of just nothing but military stuff, right? You gotta sort of break it up with maybe a scene where somebody goes back home and reconnects with the real people in different settings, or just a break from all the tedium of the military, because it can get it can get like it is to the military. You're in there and then you just want to leave because it's too tedious. You need a break. So and I think it's important to send the message that you want in a military movie. Are you making a statement about the military, or are you merely using the military to make a statement outside of that? I think when you're doing a war movie, you tend to be making a statement about the military and war. Whereas when you're using the military, trappings, you're usually heading in a different direction. But I'm not huge on using the military. I think it's not my realm. If I did it, I would definitely not be doing a war movie. Maybe I guess I could do a war movie that was an anti-war movie. That would be something I'd be interested in. But it would require a ton of research, and as I said, they're kind of sad movies a lot of times. They're kind of dreary. I tend to like happier movies, so I tend to want to gravitate more towards comedy, maybe a military comedy. I'd certainly love to do a remake of McHales Navy the right way, because I was a big fan of that back in the day. But it's still tough because even in McHales Navy there were serious moments, right? They would have to fight the Japanese because and that, in some extent, that propelled the comedy because you needed that danger to kind of offset things. I mean, there was a reason, everybody was so serious to a certain extent, and the guys in McHale's Navy were competent, even though they were a bunch of maniacs and doing all these wacky things on the side. At the end of the day, they would always come together and fight the Japanese and win because they were the heroes. You didn't want them to fight the Japanese and lose. That would be terrible. It would be funny. But at the same time, you'd have to roll back the death. You didn't show the guys in McHale's Navy committing war crimes. You'd probably show them shooting the guns and escaping, dropping some bombs and getting away. Or you'd have to portray the enemy as being so ruthless and determined to kill them that it was okay for them to kill them. But that's a more on a lighter movie. In a darker movie like Saving Private Ryan, which is more about how horrible war is, you've got the scenes of people dying at the scene of that German soldier slowly killing the American, and then later he gets executed. They take him out back and just shoot him, which is also a war crime. It's just like nobody's good, nobody wins in war. It's all just horrible and terrible, and it's just one terrible revelation after another. So, yeah, I guess the bottom line is when you're doing a military movie or a militaristic movie, number one, as always, do your research, know what the hell you're talking about. But number two, don't get bogged down in the military. You know, it's not really fun for anybody. At the end of the day, the military is not meant to be fun. It's meant to be a very serious thing, and a thing, you know, a certain way to do things in order to protect the country or whatever. So you have to create a balance of that, not get too caught up in the military stuff at the same time. But you have to make it, you know, you have to assume too that the people watching the movie aren't in the military. They don't know everything. So that gives you some leeway. It gives you a little bit of leeway to kind of ignore some of the rules, but you gotta have enough of them in there so it sounds good. You know, it sounds like people are doing the correct things. You know, and the cool thing about doing research is when you discover interesting, you know, facts or rules about a particular battle or how the military does certain things, that gives you inspiration for creating conflict, you know, within the ranks, within, you know, you got the soldiers and the officers, and you know, within doing certain things. You just, you know, a lot of times I'll read stories online from ex-military guys about their experiences, and some of them are just horrible. A lot of them are just insane. Like, you know, the guys who would go out in Afghanistan, they'd have to patrol, but all they really did was get shot at. So they just decided after a while, oh, this blows. We're just going to drive out, hide somewhere, and run out our time until it's time to come back. And they had to be careful doing that because, you know, they could also get shot there, but they also wanted to look like they were doing something and not get caught there. And if there was an actual emergency and they were in the wrong spot, well, they'd be scrambling to get back to the right spot in order to respond. So, you know, why just drive around and get blown up? So it was interesting to find out, you know, details like that. And that could definitely be an inspiration for a movie about the waste of war, right? You know, more of like a catch-22 kind of thing, where, you know, it's just so wasteful and stupid to even have this war. You're basically doing a story about, you know, the futility of it all. So get out there, screenwriters, and make a military movie.